All right. Welcome, everybody. I have a special treat today. I'm talking to Two More V's, and he's sort of a sensation. You may have heard of him at the Symbolic World Conference or seen him in our video about the Symbolic World Conference. Uh, he does a very unique style of music that he's been working with for quite a number of years now. And what we're going to look at today, since he's sort of the expert in music and I'm sort of the person who listens to it sometimes, which makes me uniquely unqualified to speak much about it at all, we're going to look at the intersection of beauty, music, and art. So, Two More V's, please tell us how awesome you are and what makes you so awesome.
I mean, pretty awesome, obviously. No, it's what I do is, as you said, like for I think 5 years I've been doing this now. Is I mix mostly speeches of speakers that many of us listen to into my music instead of recording my own vocals, which. I started out doing this because I was working with Akira the Dawn for a while, and in those collaborations, so before that I've been making music for a long time, and then for another like more time I stopped writing, not music but like lyrics, let's say, because I couldn't express the things that I wanted to express in a way that was appropriate, or I knew that other people had already expressed those things far better than I ever could. And so I just kind of stopped doing it, because what's the point? And then again, I started collaborating with Akira the Dawn, and kind of found my way back into actively making music for that, because he he pushed me quite a lot, like in a positive way. And then I just kind of experimented with stuff, saw if I could like take a speech from Jordan and put it into music. And there's like the first one that I did, I never released it, not because it's bad, but I never got it where I wanted it to be. So I'm still like every few months I'm like doing a small thing on it, and see if I can maybe can move it a little closer to release, but we'll see about that. And then I think like the third song or something that I put out was one with Jonathan Pageau. Uh, and Jonathan was very receptive and very supportive in that, um, which was a nice experience. So when I asked Jordan for permission, he got back to me personally, which I really appreciated. But Jonathan really got into it, and that very much motivated me to keep going. So we like my friend and I, with whom I worked with on the first songs that we put out, and then also in a more disjointed manner on the albums that came afterwards. We just kept going and kept experimenting, and then the one work that, if people know me, that they know me for, is the Jonathan Pageau album, Pentecost for the Zombie Apocalypse, which I still think it's pretty good. that worked out well, and it was very easy to put to music, because Jonathan had pre-written the whole thing, and it had very much like a poetic rhythm to it, more than he does in his normal speech patterns even. And yeah, we just kept going. And I also do some other stuff. So I write normal stuff now as well. I just don't release it for some reason. And I do instrumental stuff as well, which is kind of nice, because you can, when you don't have to, formulate something with actual words, then I find it easier to capture certain feelings, let's say. But yeah, that's just generally what I do. So mostly I do the speech stuff, and then I do some other stuff on the side. So if you're in Vienna at some point, you'll like I think we should be ready in like 2 months or 3, let's say. You can also hear us play stuff live. Yeah.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, so I want to sort of figure out these patterns that we're talking about with music and how that relates to beauty. And I think that, from my perspective as an avid music listener, an expert listener of music, if that's such a thing, that what I see in terms of the patterns is that the beauty of music emerges from the, we'll say, proper or right combination of these factors. And so, like, if you're working alone, I mean, there are solo artists who write and record and do, and it's weird, right? Because some of them, Jeff Lynne comes to mind, right? They can do the whole thing themselves, right? Except you can't do all of the pieces by yourself at the same time to make the piece of music, and so recording becomes a big deal, right? And the better, say, mediocre bands who still do quite well on the high end are still one guy writes the lyrics, right? One guy does the bass tracks, right? It's usually the talent is split up and then combined, and often they have, at least from what I've been reading about these bands, they have somebody who's like a combiner in the background, right? So it's sort of famous with Led Zeppelin, right? It's John Paul Jones, right? John Paul Jones is the one that does the arrangement of the music, and that's a huge part of their music. You probably don't hear that per se, right? Because arrangement is sort of related to framing in a way, right? It's how this thing's coming at you, and what order and how quickly and things like that. So it's not just that, sure, Jimmy Page came up with the guitar riff, right? And then Robert Plant wrote some great vocals, right? And then of course there's the fantastic drums by John Bonham, but without the arrangement of those things, they can sound cacophonous. And so there's something about the patterning, right, that is inherent to the beauty of the music. But also there's something past that, right? Because there's sort of patterns that work. That would be pop music, right? A lot of pop music is similar sort of patterns. And then there's patterns that work really well. And then there's patterns that work really well together. And I think there was an interview a million years ago I heard on, it was Sting was talking about one of his albums and working down in Africa to integrate that music. And I forget which album it is because I don't remember things like that, unfortunately. But what he was saying was he thought, and it seemed like at the time, or maybe still, there's some debate about this, whether or not the lyrics, match the music and how much that matters. Right, because that's part of the pattern and it's part of the sequence, it's part of the arrangement, right, is the actual lyrics. And then you've got the far end of that, which is yes, with the vocals as an instrument and vocal, not as a propositional meaning machine, right? And then you're at the other end of that. You're at the, well, let's take the propositional meaning, the beauty in the more philosophical end or religious end, right? And then put music to it. So I kind of see that as a spectrum. What do you think of that thesis? Because I just came up with it, in preparation for our talk, pretty much.
Seems accurate, I would say. I don't think that in my, let's say, creative process that I think about that actively,
right?
Because these things, let's say, come to me when I'm working with them, not in a intellectual way. It's like 4 years ago, Jonathan and I had a talk when the Pentecost album was coming up, and he asked me how I write that kind of stuff. I told him that it's like a landscape, a general one, where it's like a feeling that's associated with a landscape. Like when you have like certain kinds of like photography, for example, invokes certain feelings, and then let's say it's like like in a city or in a village, and you have like these alleyways that lead you through the place, and you see like a window there, and like the way that the house is built over there, and so that's what I then try to kind of put into musical patterns. And I'm not sure why it works. I mean, it works to me at least. I'm not sure why it works, because there's not really a conceivable connection between feelings that come up, sounds that you make, and visuals that you see. So I can't really put my finger on why that works. That's the same reason. Like I think I talked to people about that a few weeks back. Like how is it that we can see beauty as much in visuals that we see when we look at the sky, or when we look at a portrait, or when we look at when we listen to a song that we really like, or we look at a face that we find beautiful, we hear someone say words that are beautiful. I don't know why it is that we can make a thing out, which is then beauty, that is shared among all these things. It's very, very weird to me. And then to get that back to the original question a little more, when let's say Jordan Peterson is talking about something that's rather like there's an emotional appeal to it, and so with the emotional topic there comes the feeling that I want to capture, let's say, and then there's a specific way that he talks about it. So there's a rhythm, but there's also, like, you know, when you have like a voice crack, when something's particularly painful to talk about, for example, or you like you speed up in certain places. That's not only rhythm, but that's also in a sense like conveying an emotion, maybe because you want to, you know, get through it faster, or maybe you want to taste the moment, and so you kind of drag the words and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of what lays the groundwork for why these things work, like these speeches work with music. And then there's a more technical aspect, which is that some more than others, but people have a rhythm in their speech. It's an actual musical rhythm. And sometimes it's like I had that at the Symbolic World conference. I had that when I listened to a few of Jordan's speeches. It was just, I could hear the song already, because like Jordan was talking and talking and talking, and I heard like okay, it's like a 4/4 beat, and I can hear the drums there and stuff like that. So it's very funny, because you're right that it's like the speeches there, they have much more of a philosophical nature, more intellectual nature than maybe like the usual poetry that you find in song lyrics. But ultimately they're just as musical, I would say, and they're also just as poetic. It's just maybe a different kind of poetry. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I want to say that the group of speakers that you put music to, I roughly call the Peterson sphere, right? Which is the people that sort of came up around Peterson, you know, whether it's John Vervaeke or Jonathan Pageau or Paul Vanderklay, or, you know, any number of other, you know, other more minor players that are out there. And I'm sure I'm missing quite a few, but it doesn't matter. Like there is a sort of groundswell around Jordan Peterson, right? And I think the difference, we'll say, between I just want to call it dry philosophy, just to use sort of the quote modern, using all the words I don't like, modern terms about this, right? Or the idea of the academic sort of speech, right? Jordan Peterson doesn't have that. Jonathan Pageau wasn't even trained in that, so thankfully he doesn't have it either. And I think there's something about the way they speak that appeals to beauty directly. And then what you seem to be doing, from my perspective, is you're adding to that beauty by adding the musical patterns that fit the pattern of beauty. And then what I'll say about that is I have a knowledge engine model video, which I'll point to here in a little card. And in there we have two types of knowledge, not four. It's two. It's four types of information, four P's of information, and two types of knowledge. And one is concrete knowledge. That's more the textbook sort of, rote academic, 4 + 4 = 8 sort of thing, right? And then there's the intuitive knowledge. And I think the realm of beauty can only be understood through the intuitive knowledge. And part of our thesis, and Navigating Patterns crew here, which is a bunch of people, including a couple of artists, such as yourself, only with different talents, is that we've lost that intuitive knowledge. It's broken somehow or something. And so we're not able to engage, but there is a beauty that, despite that, I would say, even creeps through in, say, Peterson when he speaks, right? Or Peugeot when he's, going through explaining something to people, something important that's important to him. And the importance, I think, that conveyance of importance, that signaling of importance, is through things like cadence and rhythm and harmony, and the more musical or understood musically aspects of their speech and their language, rather than the propositions, the words that they're using. And then you're sort of combining those things, and as I said in the beginning, you've got the other end of the spectrum with I think it's Ian Anderson, right, who says like, oh no, I just use my voice as an instrument, like a guitar, sort of a thing. And there's certainly nothing wrong with it. Yes is awesome, by the way. So yeah, everybody should listen to, especially early Yes. I think that's important. And then that sort of sets us up. We've sort of already delved into it, right? So how does this relate, do you think, as an artist, as music as a form of art? Right, because I do think music is a form of art. Other people sort of, maybe are on the fence or disagree or whatever, but I see it all as sort of a different take on the art scene. I love a good painting, but paintings are not all of art, for example. So how do you think music relates to art in general?
Well, I wouldn't make a big deal out of it. It's obviously art. And to me, it's so obvious that I find it very hard to explain why it is. Like the more simple a truth is, the less you can explain about it. I think that's an idea that Mathieu Pajot put forward. It's so the whole thing is kind of weird to me, because, as you said, we in a sense moved away from let's call like intuitional knowledge, and we have this drive, let's say, to materialize everything, in the sense that, like, we make it materialistic, but that would, in my understanding, technically that would mean that what we do is we have no beautiful art anymore. We have only technical art, where people are, and I'm not trying to downplay that, because it's very impressive and they can do much more than I can with their instruments. But if you look at like these videos of like 8-year-old Chinese kids who play guitar riffs that none of us could ever in 100 years learn how to play, it's very impressive. But it's also, the more you get into this kind of technical level, the more boring it becomes. Like, it's not technically boring, but it's just, as a piece of art, it becomes boring. And so we have kind of this movement, but the general move that we also have is entirely away from technical skill, and entirely away from, let's say, these kind of forms of limitations where you have to, play correctly, you have to hit the note when you sing, you have to be in rhythm with like everything, and so on. And we move away from that more and more, which we can see in modern art and postmodern art very much, because there's nothing that puts it together. There's no unifying aspect, and so I seriously don't understand how both of that. No, I might understand it. How both of that can be the case. So the only idea that I have about it is that these people who are, especially the artists who are only doing modern, postmodern art, they might subconsciously see the movement towards materializing everything, making it materialistic, and making it, technical and objective, whatever that means. And they, again, subconsciously try to, just stir into the other direction. And that's why they go into this other extreme. And then we have the kind of manifesting this atheistic, materialistic perspective on one side, and this Dadaistic, postmodern BS on the other side. Just two extremes, when in reality, to be able to make something beautiful, you have to have both to some degree. Like, you have to have technical skill. If you don't know how to play a guitar, you're not going to make something with it. If you don't know, how to operate a computer or a recording studio, any of these things. But then also, if you don't have a certain, if you can't tap into something with your heart or whatever, then you also can't make something beautiful. These things kind of have to come together in order for art to be incarnated, if you will. Just like you have to have matter coming like from below, and kind of like an idea coming from above, or pattern from above, and then these things can come together and can manifest something properly.
Yeah, Mature Peugeot, we're doing a book club on his language of creation, obviously. So I'll link that here. Why not?
That was it. Like that wasn't my thought. That was from Mathieu Peugeot. I like it. Yeah.
Right. The meaningless matter is what he calls it. Mm-hmm. Right. And then the patterns emanating down from above. Right. And so, yeah. And I just want to highlight. So I like a lot of what you said. I can really see where you're coming from with that. And I agree. I think part of it is attributable to just there's more technology, right? And so because there's more technology, there's a flood, effectively, right? And then the technicality becomes the big thing, because you can get more technical because you have more technology, and then people focus on that, right? There's a number of things. I've been music. The whole idea of analyzing music is so big right now. There's a bunch of YouTube channels, analyzing just songs and music and bands and stories about the bands and how the music came to be. And almost none of it is something you'd expect. It's all like, what? How did that happen? And there's some stories that I knew from before. Like, I knew a bunch about the band Boston because I grew up in Boston. So we heard the rumors. We knew what was going on. We know it was one guy really who did most of the work, right? And then one remarkable singer that no one can duplicate to this day, right? But Spirit in the Sky, he can't reproduce that sound. He's been trying even, and I saw an interview with him recently on a YouTube channel, and I was sort of amazed by that. I was like, what? He can't. It was like they just don't have the stuff they had back then in terms of parts to build that anymore, and so you can't make that sound again. And it's kind of a cool, funky sound, right? If you ever heard the song "Spirit in the Sky," and they're still pursuing it, so maybe someday. But it's near reproducible sound in some sense, right? And that's what you would have in a flood. It's a bunch of things that come and go, right? Mm-hmm. They're ephemeral. Some other instrument too, I can't remember the name of it, for a Zeppelin song. And I'm a big Zeppelin fan, because if you're not, you're weird or something. I don't know what's wrong with you. Led Zeppelin really changed music in so many ways, right? And I think that's part of it. So, to your point, like the grunge movement, or a lot of grunge bands. Why? Because it's basically lazy instrument playing at some level, right? But Nirvana, like they did something with that somehow that shouldn't have worked. Like if you look at it from a technical perspective, Kurt Cobain's just a lazy guitarist. What's wrong with him? Like he's
And a
just
lazy
lazy
singer.
and a lazy singer. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And he's just lazy, and yet he was able to channel some kind of spirit more than once, maybe different spirits, different times. You know, however you want to split that out. Is really able to channel something that other people could also sense, right? And made them a huge band. And unfortunately, that didn't end well for him, which is very sad. But you know, there's something about, you know, the balance, for lack of a better term, although I think balance is sort of a reduction, right? There's a balance between how technical are you versus how in the spirit you are, and you can't actually do both, right? And I think you probably see that, although I'm a little bit less familiar, but a little familiar with like Frank Zappa, who's very like quality first, quality first, quality first. And I've never resonated with too many of his songs. I just don't like his stuff. Some of his stuff is okay. But like I'm kind of like, yeah, you know, it's somebody says like, do you want to listen to Zappa or do you want to listen to almost anything else? I'm like, you know what? Give me some Taylor Swift. Cause I'm sorry, I know now I've upset every musical person that's watching, I'm sure. But like, I'd rather just have some fun with my music, and not all of her stuff is good, but some of her good stuff is really good. Again, she captures the spirit. And I think that's what's important. And I think in that balance, again, for lack of a better term, I think that's where you do it. And how you do it is that intuitive way of knowing. And maybe that's what makes it an art, is the way that you take the material, right, and the pattern, because you talked about the pattern earlier. Oh, I hear this pattern in the speech, which is really amazing, right? This guy's talking and he's on stage even, right? Like we were there, both of us. It's a wonderful experience. And we're watching him talk on stage. And you know, I can't say we got exactly the same experience or anything like that, because I'm sure that's not true. But we both heard the, for lack of a better term, the musicality in the message, right? Not just the message. We heard that too, for sure. But we both heard a musicality. Maybe it's not even the same musicality, which is why I'm excited about your upcoming album. But that's what makes it art, is not just the, you know, just putting pieces together at random, right? That's assembly or assemblage or something. I think Sally Joe calls it. That's, you know, that's paint by numbers, right? It's music by numbers. You can, you know, you can work it out. And like, that's not a me thing, right? This is in Star Trek Next Generation, right? When Data is playing the violin and he says like, what do you think? I used, you know, these 3 violinists to, you know, and they all go, it sounded a little stiff, you know, because he lacks, because he's a robot, right? He's an android. He lacks that ability to get in the spirit and make it his own without changing it so much that it's not his own, right? And that's sort of, that's, to me, that's what makes it art. And so music is forming the instruments in such a way that with the patterns that you're recreating a spirit that is manifest through, you know, whatever your form of inspiration is. In your case, your form of inspiration is these folks in the Peterson sphere making spirited, if you know, for lack of a better term, speeches, right? That really convey a depth that you know can't easily be conveyed. And I think that's what makes, say, Jordan Peterson a better lecturer than most, right? And you can't just give somebody a script and make them a good lecturer, in the same way that, you know, I can't even read scripts that I write, so I use notes because I can't. This is totally unscripted, which is even better in my opinion, because we are trying to catch a spirit about, you know, what is the relationship of beauty, music, and art, and so that sort of leaves us. So, and we've got the sense, right, as you've outlined, that, you know, there's a technicality to it, but too much technicality, you kind of lose it, right? You get stuck in this thing that we would call modern art or whatever, right? This Dadaism, I really like that. I like that. That really resonated with me for whatever reason, right? But we also don't want to go too much in the other direction, right? Like too far afield, we'll say, to where it's just a cacophony. like the Swans or something. The Swans is very cacophonous music. It's like, not that they don't have their uses. If you're really, 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 really suicidally depressed, maybe they can bring you out of it. I don't know. That's what my friend claimed all the time while listening to them. But that leads, so we know somewhere sort of in between, again, this is going to be sloppy language for sure, somewhere in between those two extremes, there's a thing called music. But then there's the question, and this really arose for me when I listened to The Anadromist, and How We Got Here, which is a great series. It's way too long. I love Burn Power, but man, just cut that down. Cut it at least in half. Where he talks about rap music, and he basically points out rap music is born of actual theft of equipment. And it's like, wow. So they found a truck, or hijacked a truck, or whatever happened. There was a truck with very expensive high-end musical equipment, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth, and they got their hands on it. And it's in the milieu of New York City. I mean, this is all according to Burn Power. I just trust the guy because I think he knows what he's talking about. I think he was there. So I'm gonna go with his version here in case anybody goes, you're wrong. Like I'm just kind of parroting poorly what he said in the series, right? And so there's these mixed neighborhood culture from the Caribbean, right, and from the African American community, right, and from the poor white community, and they get hold of this stuff and they create rap music. And then what immediately comes up with rap music is theft. And so, what do you think is the difference between, say what you're doing? I mean, you're getting permission and all that, obviously, right? And people are thrilled to have you do it because you if you were doing a poor job, they would probably be like, next time, no, right? But obviously you're doing a good job of it. I've heard your stuff. It's fantastic. So I don't know if that's worth anything to anybody, but it's my channel, so it must be worth something to someone who's listening. I think it's great stuff. So what do you think? Where do you think that line is between like music and theft, and when does music become theft, or when does theft and how does theft enter into music? What do you think of that?
That's a very tough question. So I don't think that I've drawn a line for myself there. Okay, if you look at my musical roots, for example, like the first band that was my band, let's say that I was into, and not something that my parents also liked, or something like that, Blink-182. So I mean, all of the punk rock genre, but them specifically, they're very much known for having exactly like 3, maximum 4 chords, and all of their songs are built on those. And it's true, I learned almost all of their songs. It is true, it's almost all the same 3 chords. And so you could call that theft if you wanted to. But then on the other hand, like I don't think that you can intellectualize this. So I think you have to feel it. And because my feelings obviously are always right, I feel like it's not theft. I feel like a song like, okay, so I mean, people probably don't know unless they're fans, but a song like When Your Heart Stops Beating, that the bassist of Blink-182 wrote with his other band, and then you have a song like Dogs Eating Dogs that Blink wrote a few years later. They are built on the same chord progression, and you can kind of hear similarities in there, but they're 2 different songs. And so the way that I see it is that every chord, it's maybe the same with speaking. So when I'm talking to you now, I'm using kind of the same words, mostly the same words that I'm using when I talk to, I don't know, Mercury from Sorting Myself Out, because we're using the English language. But no one would come to me and be like, oh, you stole your speech from the one that you did with Mercury. No one does that. Because right. I arranged them in a different way, or in some sense in a different way, even if one sentence that I speak is the same sentence. And then the other thing is that the context that I'm speaking them in is a different context. And so I feel like that's kind of how you might get around the idea that it's theft. I mean, you can go to early hip hop, or you can go to what producers do very often, is that they take samples that other people wrote, and then they put them together in their own song. And I mean, my 14-year-old self would slap me for that, but I don't think that's stealing either. I mean, I don't like to do it, but that's because I have probably some issue to work out where I have to prove myself through the music that I make, something like that. But I don't think that's theft. I think that you're just being creative in the field that you're working in. So if you look at early Akira stuff, for example, much of what he did was just use samples that you can hear in other songs. Not all of it was, but much of it was. And I don't think he's stealing there. First of all, because he paid for those samples, so he's allowed to use them. But then also he's rearranging them the same way that I'm rearranging words right now, the same way that a painter, Sally, is rearranging colors that have been used by someone else before, but she's rearranging them in a new way, even if she's using like similar motives. So I have a painting by Sally, for example, where I specifically asked her, do something in the spirit of Der Wanderer von Caspar David Caspar David Friedrich. You've seen that one. You can look it up, but you've seen that one. And there are similarities there. It's not a stolen piece of art. It's its own kind of piece of art still. And the same way with all the punk rock songs. Yeah, they're kind of built on the same chords, and yeah, they do sound similar. There are patterns that you can pick up on, but there's always most often something that makes them unique still, something that makes it that song and not the other song, something like that. And so I don't think people are stealing. I don't think early hip hop was stealing, even though they sampled songs that already existed and then just rapped over it. It's like it's just a different field.
Yeah. So I think how much is stealing? I heard this story. I don't think it's apocryphal. Heard it from a good source. That Daft Punk went out and kind of figured out, like, wait a minute, we're gonna run out of material, and then they did an album. And again, I don't remember the name of the album. I actually, it's my least favorite Daft Punk album. but they did an album with other artists, right? And so they make all this music, and they've got these real artists, we'll say, that are like playing guitar, doing whatever they do in collaboration with Daft Punk. And they did that on purpose to sort of reinvigorate the scene, so that it wasn't all just this techno drum machine sort of stuff that they do. And I know there's 1,000 genres that I'm probably upsetting in doing that. Also, I don't buy any of your crazy genres. I think there are only a handful. But yeah, I mean, even artists seem to recognize the problem of running out of stuff. And I would say, see, the theft in pop music in particular, I'm sure you've heard the mashups where people go, every pop song ever, and then they do the chord progressions, and they just run through and switch the lyrics around and some of the background instruments, and then you start to hear Taylor Swift and you start to hear other pop songs mixed in, and then they'll go back to Taylor Swift, and then they'll do whatever, right? And a lot of that, and I think that that's part of it. But then you get bands like Led Zeppelin, and the reason why I bring them up, aside from I actually know something about that, something minor at least, I'm fairly well read. I read the book. There was a show I watched a million years ago. This is quite some time ago. We used to have this thing called Muzak in the elevator, right? You'd be in the elevator and you hear the song, and it wasn't the rendition of the song you've ever heard using instruments you've ever heard, but you knew the song. Right. And then a lot of times it was like a Zeppelin song or a Pink Floyd song or something. Right. It was just filler music for while you were in the elevator or waiting in a waiting room or whatever. Right. It was this some weird thing that they did for a while. And the guy who headed up Muzak, I think he closed the company at the time. He said, none of the new music is amenable to this process. We can't change the instruments, maintain the sound so that it's recognizable, and sell this as a unique product anymore. And so Muzak kind of went away from the world. It's gone. And he blamed it on this, for lack of a better term, I'll just call it depth of the songs that they were using, like Zeppelin and Floyd and a bunch of others. I don't have a full list in my head or anything, but you used to hear it all the time, right? I mean, it was everywhere. There's a whole company, selling this stuff so that people would be occupied, without, it's another way to give back to the artists, right? They don't have to do the work, right? It's not necessarily a negative thing. I mean, you can see anything as a negative thing, I guess, but it was a positive for the music industry at the time. And it went away because the music industry lost some depth in some way. It kind of spread out more, right? So you have more pop songs, easier to do, that they're everywhere, right? As much as I love Katy Perry, like she's ran out of stuff, right? Just like Madonna did, they all do. Pop runs out of stuff eventually. And that's, I don't know if that's a limitation of the instruments. Again, I'm not musically inclined. I can play the scale on a piano still, but that was as far as I ever got. So I don't know how this stuff works mechanically, but at some point, the music has attenuated or something so much, but you're still able to inject that spirit in there, right? Even with a very few a few number of instruments, right? Whereas the depth of something, for me, it's Beethoven Sixth. So like that's it. The only thing better than Beethoven Sixth might be Zeppelin's Battle of Evermore, because that might be the greatest song that's ever been composed, and the album version, please. I'm rather enamored with it. But like those are really deep pieces of music, right? The fifth, the sixth, and the ninth by Beethoven, I don't even know what everybody else is doing at some point. I'm just like lost. Like, why are you wasting your time? And you get that, but that's a huge collaboration to make that work. All these instruments have to work together. The timing has to be pretty close. I'm actually terrible. Like, don't take me out to a symphony playing the sixth, because I'll just criticize the hell out of it because I have my one recording and I like that, and everybody else does it wrong. That's just the way my brain works, unfortunately. Sure. Right? Same with Battle of Evermore. I don't want to hear the non-album version of Battle of Evermore ever. I don't want to hear an alternate album. I don't want to hear it. Like, I'm not interested. I've got my perfect version. Thank you very much. Right? For better or for worse. Right? And everything else to me feels like theft in some sense. Like, oh, you're trying to reproduce it and you can't. You just can't, can you? And that's, obviously that's a little far. But I have a little OCD, as is the way I am. So I am a musical purist, but I'm an everything purist. So this isn't a surprise. This is just the way I live. But there is a sense that, sometimes people are just kind of stealing stuff, right? They're not putting in the work somehow, whatever that work is. And it doesn't relate to time, right? Because a talented artist can basically show up, do their bit, and take off, and it's spot on. It's great. It's pretty, a good example of this is, again, another apocryphal story that I think is bang on is, they're screwing around in the studio, and Robert Plant does the lyrics for Stairway to Heaven in like no time. And that's not their best song according to me, but it's on the same album, interestingly, right? But he just had a talent, right? And then when he needed to belt something out, he could just do it. And other people can't. Like, there's a lot of people that just don't. Like, I'm never going to be a pianist. So I'm never going to be a good guitarist, even if I can ever manage to play guitar, which so far I've failed at for all of my life. I've tried, but there's various reasons why it doesn't work. But there is a sense that there is a line to be drawn, and that's where it gets tricky, I think, because as we talked about earlier, like music, proper music, something that resonates not just with you and your small group of friends, but resonates sort of more universally, maybe not universally because maybe that's impossible, but more universally, has to do with intuition. And so what I hear you pointing out, you can correct me if I'm mishearing you, is that there's an intuition that you get about when it becomes theft. And so
Yeah.
we couldn't nail it down and say, well, if you use 50% chords from somebody else's song and 30% of their lyrics in this order, it's like that doesn't even make any sense, right? And it wouldn't hold true at the same time. So it'd be hard to do, right? It'd be hard to kind of quantify it that way. You divide it up into quantities, into pieces, and do it. But also, it wouldn't hold true. Almost certainly wouldn't hold true. And so, I don't know. What do you think? I mean, is there a way to tell? Like, is there something we can universally agree upon? Like, did the real question that we need to answer to more these is, did Milli Vanilli do anything wrong?
Yeah. So,
yeah, I figured I'd get you with that.
Good one. So, just real quick, one thing I'd like to point out: you're not a guitarist, you're a bassist. So you'll probably have more luck with that. Get a cheap bass and then try that. I think you'll excel at it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I'll give it a shot.
Well,
I don't know why you would make that assessment, but I'm curious as to whether or not you're right.
I just know.
Okay.
Yeah,
hey, that's fine. I'm just fascinated that anybody could make an assessment like that. That's great. I don't disbelieve you at all.
Yeah, try it out. I want to see it. No, I'm pretty certain about that. And then no, you cannot make rules for that. You can't, and that's because of the nature of the thing that you're trying to. It's not like this isn't a mathematical equation, and that's kind of the reason why pop music became more flat. Like, I don't want to be that guy. I don't like it when rock people are like, oh, everything in pop is shit. I find that just cringe. It says, like, I usually don't say that, but I'm always like, okay, boomer. That's just annoying when they do it. And so, and it was annoying when I did it when I was 14. So I was like that as well. No, but it did become shit. So let's say more shit. There's also good shit, but there's also bad shit. So we have excuse the swearing. We have, there's a certain, so if you look into pop music from the 2010 period, there's one chord progression, mostly one chord progression, and one specific rhythm. And the rhythm goes like boom, 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 boom. It's and the whole song through. And whichever song you listen to, it has that. That's because there was one song that was very, and that's common knowledge, but that's because there was one song that was like that and was very, very popular. And so the people who write the songs for contemporary artists, they're like, okay, this is a formula that works. We have a lot of money that we put into this artist figure. And so we're going to do this, and we're going to do this until it doesn't work anymore, because we can't take risks because of the massive amount of money that went into the whole thing. And so that's why it becomes more shallow, because they take less and less from the formula that worked to, because they're sure that, okay, it's this kind of bass sound, it's this, you get what I mean. And then they just distill it down, and strip it off its unique aspects. And then it's just, the same song that you listen to over and over. And I'm pretty certain that people 50 years ago would have made a similar kind of comment or statement about it, because that's probably been going on for a long time. And so people are always like, yeah, people have been complaining about this or that for so many years. You can see it if you look into history books. And so it's not a justified opinion. I highly disagree. It's still a justified opinion. It just shows that it has been going on for a long time. That's not a good thing. And then the other example that you can see this in is particularly rap music. Like my best friend is very much a fan of trap rap. where you have like massive amounts of autotune in there. It's not a bass line, it's just a kick with like a very like long, like slow decay, deep end, something like that. And then you have the same rhythm in all the songs. It's always na 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 na, and then massive amounts of autotune over that. It's always the same thread. I hate it. I can't listen to it. I hate it. But there's people who enjoy it. So but you see something like that. So someone was successful with it, and then other people took it on, but they didn't get why. They might have understood some of why it was appealing to people. They didn't understand what made it unique, though, because I'm certain the first song who did that, if that was the only song ever put out, I think I would look more. I wouldn't like it, but I would look more favorably at it. But people just see. So I don't know. You have 100% in the original artwork, and then someone else sees it and maybe gets like 50% of it, and someone else sees that and gets, you know what I mean, like 25%, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So that's something. That's definitely something that is going on, and yeah, no, I hate to say it. I find it boring as well. I can't listen to it. I listen to something like I really like bedroom pop. It's like Clyro, for example, if that's how you say her name. So it's just very mellow. The drums aren't harsh. There's a nice kind of groovy but slow bass line, and then always like acoustic guitars and a very sweet female voice. Whichever artist you listen to, it's always a very sweet female voice. I just think that's very soothing. It's technically also boring. I don't find it boring. It's technically also boring because it's the same stuff all over again. Same with lo-fi music. Very like it's literally in the name. It's very low effort stuff. There's like they even built in heavy disharmonies and problems, and like when the drums are kind of off, like rhythmic anomalies and stuff like that. And yeah, you can make an argument that it's boring. You can make an argument that it's bad, that it's too little, and you can make the same kind of argument about pop music. So basically, I'm a hypocrite because I like some of the boring stuff, but I don't like the other boring stuff. It comes down to one point, and that's like music is subjective. And we can talk about technicalities, and we can talk about this and that, and is it theft, or is it too easy or too lazy or something like that. And for some things I would say, yeah, it is, but it's utterly subjective. There's nothing properly objective about it. You can say, oh, this is not a harmony. This sounds off or something like that, and you can be right about that. But the way that people experience that kind of disharmony, that's something else, because sometimes what a song needs is for the drums to be a little off, or for the singer to be kind of not in key. I don't know if you've ever listened to the Front Bottoms, but that guy, like the voice, like I know people who hate him because he has those voice cracks and he's kind of off key oftentimes. And I listen to it and I'm like, oh, my heart, I love it. So it's utterly subjective. There's no rule that you can make for why people like things that are technically bad, let's say.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you kind of covered a lot in there. So I want to sort of go over it in the navigating patterns fashion here. So sure. I think one of the big things that you talked about is there are these patterns that get copied, right? Pop music is a prime classic example of that. Right, auto-tune is a good example. Right, once one person was popular with auto-tune, everybody used auto-tune. On the other hand, like some of the Belinda Carlisle stuff, I think auto-tune is the best thing in the world when used there. And other places, I'm like, oh, this auto-tune's terrible. Like they shouldn't use auto-tune here at all. Right, and so yeah, I mean, you can't just pick a technology or even a pattern, to your larger point, and say this is good or this is bad. And then I think rather than, let's say, subjective or purely subjective, I'd rather think that your experience in the world combined with that pattern, because all patterns are repetitive and boring at some layer, that's what creates the interest for you, right? Is, what flow are you in? Like I was never, big into Nirvana. Not that I don't like their really good songs, because I like really good songs, right? But the rest of their stuff, I'm kind of like, I don't know why I listen to the rest of the stuff they do, Like, I don't get that. But they're really good songs. To me, there's a difference to other, and I've been exploring this, on and off for years. But like, there are people who can't tell, and then there are people that can tell. They can tell, like, so like Led Zeppelin's a really good example. Led Zeppelin doesn't have any bad songs. There were no bad Led Zeppelin songs, but they've got two really mediocre songs. I don't like either of them. Like, I don't like The Crunch. This is no surprise. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, what's going on with this song, right? And a lot of bands have that property, but in Blink 182 is a good example too, right? They have a lot of very similar songs, and they have some absolutely outstanding songs that just are so much better than the rest of their stuff. You're like, what's going on here? Like, how can they do this? And then they come back down. And there's nothing wrong with Down Here. They're a perfectly serviceable band, right? Like, good stuff, right? But then they reach this height, and you're like, whoa, what's going on with that? And there's something about it because it's still in the pattern. Like, their really good songs don't sound that much different for the most part than the rest of their stuff, right? And you see this a lot in albums, especially older albums. Nowadays, everything's mixed, so no one cares. But in the old days, they used to, like the old Led Zeppelin stuff. Man, the album layout's really important. Pink Floyd album layouts, fantastic. ELO, Jeff Lynne, album layout is really important. Like that. There's an extra layer there that doesn't exist anymore because you really don't have albums that much, right? And so there's something to that layering, that patterning. But then we like patterns and we need patterns. Patterns are also boring, but only if you don't like, if you don't cohere to them from your experience. I think. I mean, I'm guessing here, obviously, but like I think there's something about it, and that's what creates the illusion of subjectivity. And I think that's the better way to think about it. Is like, well, there's patterns of reality. And we don't need to be on the same patterns of reality trail or something, right? That's not necessary. You live in a totally different place. Like all Europeans, you have fanciful ideas about how the big the U.S. really is. And then, your understanding of how the world is based on your experience, right? And your experience is limited. And so is mine. And so I don't understand Germany at all. I don't understand Switzerland.
Me neither. That's why I left. Me neither. That's why.
Well, there you go. Right. I don't understand Vienna. I don't understand Austria. I mean, these are all places I've never been. Right. And I have a tiny sliver of understanding of Scotland and a tiny sliver of understanding of Croatia because I've been there. Right. Didn't spend nearly enough time, but like I've been to those places. Right. But like the patterns, even of the cultural, say, favorite music, whatever that is. I mean, it could be imported pop music from the US even, but the stuff they find interesting is not always the stuff that I would find interesting. But a lot of times it is for, we'll say, those big songs, I think, that really resonate, that really get popular. There's something about them. And to your point, I don't think it's identifiable per se. I don't want to try to break it down. I don't think that's a good use of time. But there's something going on there. And I would argue that's the sort of thing that you're sort of capturing, right? When you do what you do with your wisdom wave stuff or whatever you're calling it. I think you should call it wisdom wave, by the way. But we've talked about this before. And so that to me is the importance of music and sort of navigating reality. What does music tell us about reality? How does it help us as a person that has a subjective experience, right? To understand and know and cohere to reality. Well, obviously you've got this whole thing about, I hear Peterson, I hear the musicality, I want to add the instruments, right? I want to add all the other components to it and show people the beauty that I got out of listening to him on the stage at the Symbolic World Conference, for example. It's just one example, right? And so I'm going to put that together, right? What other sort of things do you see in terms of music and helping people to navigate the real world? I mean, I sort of hinted at the one, right, where my buddy used to tell me, like, I don't know, if you're really depressed, you start with the Swans, and he had a whole sequence of music to listen to get out of depression. I don't know if it works, but I've done similar sorts of things, so I can imagine that he's right, and it at least seemed to work for him. So,
Mhm.
what other things do you see other than those two examples?
Well, I would like to just for a second go into the other direction of how you describe how I describe what I do. It's like one is that I listen to stuff and then I'm like, oh, I hear a song around that and I try to make it. But the other way that things kind of happen is that I just start writing something without knowing what's going to happen to it,
Mm.
and then I put a speech segment to it. So on the new album, there was one song was like I had moments like that before, but never like this. So I have there's a song where the instrumental is like 6 minutes, something like that, and the first half exactly half. Like to the second, the first half is like piano stuff with very mellow, very like nice, like acoustical stuff going on. Um, and then at the exact like in the exact middle it switches into like a very kind of I hate the word like epic triumphant rock
Mm.
thing. It's like heavy guitars and so on, and then I kind of messed around with which speech bit from Jonathan's talk could fit into that, and one was kind of working out without me doing much, and so I kept listening and trying to find specific points that I want to savor. So if I move the speech around, that this part would still be where it was before. And in the exact moment where the music flips into this other kind of thing, Jonathan also says, and everything flips. And with the flips, there's a shift in the music thing. And so there's some, I mean, some call it coincidence. I hate that. It's like a synchronistic event. There's something happening there in moments like this, and and I think that's what kind of makes, as you said before, kind of the things that like the songs that stick or the bands that stick or something like that. That I think they're tapping into something that is that like it's something. It's like a manifestation of something, like a proper incarnation of something. Whereas maybe songs that are less whatever that is, they have not 100%. They have like 50%, and things still come together, and people can still like the song. Um, and then, as you also pointed out, of course, it's like your particular perspective also makes it what it is. So a song that I just moves me to tears might move you not at all because your context is just far different. So that's kind of like one thing about that, and then the way that people can, like your actual question to answer that, the way that people can use it. I mean, so I can't. What your friend did, I can't do that because I can't plan something like that out. Because as soon as I put a plan to something, then I find ways to make it not work, and so I kind of just have to go with the flow for things to work.
Mm.
Um, which is not an easy thing to do, but definitely something worth learning.
Well,
And
he was an engineer. I mean, he's an engineer.
then
And
it's
and he,
not
I mean,
surprising.
he's also musically inclined, and he
Hmm.
can play instruments and stuff. But he's an engineer, and you're an artist, and so like if you want to map that back to the knowledge engine model, right? Like, yeah, he's very concrete knowledge guy, and you're a very intuitive knowledge guy, as you described. So I just want to make that clear. Like, I want that pattern to be clear, and yeah, I think you're just to add to what you were saying. there's a synchronistic element to something like the Battle of Evermore. And I would say it doesn't happen in a pattern, but it happens multiple times in the song, right? I would say the same thing for Beethoven 6. There are these synchronistic moments where there's a change in the song. Battle of Evermore is harder to hear. There is a change in the song. There's several changes in the song. It's harder to hear those changes, I would say, which is opposed to the patterns that cohere and the layering of the patterns that cohere. You don't really hear the layering until you start taking tracks out of music, all right, until it decoheres at some point for you. But yeah, there's a difference between patterns and your connection with the patterns and how good the patterns are, how well they mesh, whether it's technically a good mesh or not, right? And that difference versus the difference of these synchronistic moments, as you've coined them. I think that's actually really insightful on your part. So anyway, I sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
All good. Yeah, the other thing is with so that's what before I worked with Akira, I listened to his stuff for like a year. And he later started calling it as psychotechnology, I believe. Because the way that it works is that listening to Peterson is one thing. It's a really good thing. I recommend it. But then listening to music also really good thing. Anyone who's never listened to music, I highly recommend it. It's a cool way to spend your time. And then there's things that stick, and with music it's melodies mostly. Sometimes it's the lyrics, but mostly it's melodies that stick. And with people talking, it's maybe sentences, but I think much more the meaning behind the sentences that stick. But both can be kind of, I think it's easier to have a melody stuck in your head than the meaning of a sentence, I believe, or at least easier to stick to the melody. But when you combine them, then what happens is that you can kind of access both of those parts in your brain where these things would get stuck, and you can mix them together. And so you can kind of, what I said is like you can kind of brainwash yourself, because you're actually making these things stick like double, because you have the melody, but to the melody connected is the rhythm of the speech and is the meaning of what was being said. And that's the way that I use it. That's ultimately how I became Orthodox. Because I was working on the Pentecost album for like 2 years, and so almost every day I had Jonathan in my ear saying the same thing over and over again. It's like, oh, these patterns, blah 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 blah. This is like in Orthodoxy, it's beautiful. And so after 2 years, I was like, okay, I understand it now. And So that's the other way that you can use it. I don't think it's going to be in mainstream. I find that very, very, like, it's not very probable that that's going to happen. But there is a certain niche for it, let's say, and there's certain people for whom it can work very, very well. And I've talked to a bunch of those people before the summit, but also at the summit. So it's really nice. That's the way that I think that you can use very, very specifically like this kind of music. And then I think beyond that, if you look at, let's say, normal music, I don't think that you can say, okay, I'm gonna do X now because I listened to this song or whatever. But I do feel like that while there is a certain emotional incontinence that we can observe in modern society, which I'm not much a fan of, there's at the same time, I think, a strong disconnect happening, and a strong inability to meet what's happening inside of you. We can't. I mean, that's why drug use is so much more prevalent now, because we're not equipped anymore to deal with the things that happen in our lives.
Right.
Speaking like, yeah, and I think that certain songs, certain genres, maybe even can allow you to have a place where either you can express your feelings, your inner world, in a sense, and then also you have a sort of connection there.
Mhm.
So you're going through something, and you kind of know what it is, but not really, and you also don't really know who to talk to about it. And then you listen to a song, and the singer is like saying this, and you're like, wait, that's exactly what's going on in my head. And so you have a
Right.
sense of connection, and you have a sense of being understood, and that's validating, and it's very, very necessary for feelings to be validated.
Right.
Doesn't mean that every feeling or every sentiment is correct. So if I'm angry at someone, maybe I'm right in being angry about it, maybe I'm not. But what's very, very important is that I can actually recognize that I'm angry, and that I can give this anger a space, not in the sense that I act on it, but in the sense that I can actually look at it and look at where it's coming from. And
Well,
I
yeah, it's
think
got to be
that's,
permissible, right? An
yeah.
emotion has to be permissible. Otherwise, you're alone in the world. And what I hear you talking about is, more the integration of
Mhm.
you with reality. And in a world where we've got a problem of, we'll call it individualism, objectivism, and materialism. Of course, I have a video on that named exactly that. Um, that's a big deal, right? Because we don't want to be alone. We don't want to be feeling like we're alone. We want to know that we are the sorts of creatures that have enough in common with other sorts of creatures that we can live together in harmony, right? And you can't do that if you're, living in a basement somewhere playing video games. I mean, that really disconnects you from the other people in the world. And you'd say, well, I play online with other people. Look, I only ever played online with other people. I love that. I love online play. Plus, I'm a strategist, so I can't beat you with my with my skills at the controllers. But if it's a strategy game, I've actually got a chance in that game, right? So I'm a big fan of that. But that's not the same as going outside and seeing dragonflies and seeing flowers and watching flowers disappear, daylilies, for example, which I have on my property. I never even noticed because I didn't go outside every day. So you run into this situation where music can reconnect you and reintegrate you to the world, right? And I think that's part of the role in how does it help you navigate reality? Well, it helps you put in touch. But then I think there's also a dark side to that, right? Where you can resonate with the wrong thing. So on the one hand, it fights domicide. And John Vervaeke talks about domicide, right? It fights that domicide, that aloneness, that, oh, there's not enough people around me to keep me safe, right? Or where I feel that I belong, or any number of things, that side effects from not feeling like you have a home, home in a small sense and home in a much larger sense, a community. Um, but also, when you're stuck in that domicide, music can get you out. But there is a dark side, which is it can lead you astray too. And this is always the complaint, like, oh, this music has terrible lyrics talking about shooting cops, or whatever it is, and hookers and drugs and all this bad stuff. And so there's definitely a danger in there too, right? Where it's not that it changes the nature of, quote, reality somehow, although I've got my thoughts on that, right? But it certainly puts your relationship to reality in a bad light, puts you in a bad perspective with relation to reality, or it can. And so we have to be careful with that, because yeah, I think music is to some extent a psychotechnology, or at least a type of technology that allows humans to relate and interrelate with each other and with other things. And so, yeah, when you don't have that, it's a problem. But when it's aimed wrong, it's also. But it's like a bow and arrow. You can aim the bow and arrow at your future dinner, or you can aim it at your family. because to your point, you're angry. Like, oh, there's nothing wrong with being angry. Oh, everybody gets angry. Okay, well, if everybody gets angry, but they don't punch the wall and I do, that's helpful, right? Because now I'm not alone in my anger, but also I know there's a way out of that anger causing me negative side effects, right? And so music should be, more positively, we use the word valence, more positively valenced. It should be aiming towards something higher and good, so that it's giving you the relation on that end, and not a relation to pop music. I mean, the reason why I like pop music for me is entertainment, right? It's very middle. It just kind of aims you at the middle stuff. You don't have to think too hard, right? You don't have to get so emotionally invested in that way, right? I listen to Beethoven's Sixth, and I'm very emotionally invested, right? Especially in the things around me. So I typically do it when I take a nice warm bath or something, right? But when I'm listening to some Tay-Tay, some nice Taylor Swift, I'm usually driving down the street back from somewhere where I had a good time, and I just want to kind of keep my brain coasting in happy fun time mode, right? Or recall something from the past, like, oh yeah, I remember that time you went to Weir's Beach and had a great time, and then on the way back you listen to this piece of music, and now you can listen to it again and get a little residual of that feeling, right? Reconnect with the past, because music, I think, is really about those connections, that many to many connections that we make in the world. And when you're doing it with that kind of technology, the technology that vibrates sound waves in the air, or however you think about it, that's a special way, a unique way, in my mind, of connecting back up. We'll say maybe it's inferior to singing in the choir, or singing at church, or chanting like the Gregorian monk chants do, which I'm a fan of, right? You see that a lot in Eastern religions with chanting. But it's still important, right? It's important that that's part of how we're relating to reality. It's not optional either. Like, let's get rid of all the music. We're not crazy Baptists or anything. We don't like the music. You kind of have to have it. But I think that's what helps you to navigate the patterns of reality. Is, well, where is this music? And it's not just music. We use other things too to know, because a lot of music will put sort of unconscious thoughts in your head without you kind of realizing it. Why are you angry? You listen to this angry music all the time. And it'd be interesting to, and maybe you have some thoughts on this, but if you don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, that's fine too. Is the music reflecting culture, or is the music moving the culture? Because I don't, some days I wonder, I hear a song and I go, when was this song recorded exactly? Because I see that pattern popping up much later on. And were they onto something? Or is the fact that they wrote this song and it became popular the thing that caused us the problem? I never know, right? I'm always like, I don't know which came first. I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of that. I know that was a lot.
No, I do. Maybe on the last thing that you said first. So, I mean, I don't claim to know which way it is, but I think that the way that history plays out, and I'm not talking about individuals, but the general, like the way that mankind evolves, I think is rather set. We're not gonna, I mean, I'm obviously also speaking as a Christian, but I think I would have said something like that before, when I was much more, on the side of Terence McKenna, let's say, with the time wave, and all that kind of stuff. No, I think that the course of history is very much settled, and it's not entirely clear who will do what, because that's up to actual decisions of actual individuals. But we have a certain direction that we're gonna move in, and we're not gonna stop that. And I think that artists, be it as shallow as you might conceive their art to be, which I often do, but I think that artists just in general have a connection to that realm where these things kind of exist, and we can and you can kind of tap into what it is. And so we have people moving towards vulgarity and obscenity. Um, and then we have artists who make art who accelerate that massively. Like I forget the name. What with that female rapper chick, Nicki Minaj, for example.
Oh yeah.
Something like
Whoa.
that. I'm not a fan of her music, um, and then just because I don't like that kind of music. But then also the kind of themes that you have in there, and then also like similar stuff. It's so vulgar, it's so obscene, and the people listen to that, and it normalizes it. I had a when 10 years ago when I was in my weird psychedelic years, let's say, the music that I listened to, I mean, it was beautiful music as well, but there's also a lot of trash rap where it was like glorifying drug use and all that kind of stuff, and uh, these things I didn't think so, but at that time, but looking back, these things definitely normalized it, and also allowed me morally, let's say, to move further into that kind of realm. And so we definitely have both of it. And I think where culture, or let's say where the artist moves the culture in that direction, I think that happens on the level of the individual who listens to it, and the way where the level on which let's say the set course of history pushes um, pushes the artist, let's say, or where culture pushes the artist to do something like that. That's not on the level of the individual. That happens on, I have no proper name for it, but on a different level. So much, let's say, to that. And then the other thing that you brought up a little earlier about the way that you have to be careful what kind of art you consume or what kind of music you consume, let's say. So where I come from musically, it's, I mean, except for the one example that I just gave you, is much of like the hardcore stuff, the punk rock stuff, the grunge stuff, all that kind of stuff. And I mentioned the positive thing that it can do, which is allow you to actually express certain emotions that otherwise would probably be suppressed because they're unpleasant for you yourself to feel, and then also unpleasant for everyone around you if you act on them. Um, uh, but that gives a certain space, and allows things to be seen. Which, like, if you heard Peterson talk about the dragon story, oh, why did it grow so big? I think it was just wanted to be seen, something like that. So that's important. But the other thing that can happen is, like, one of the bands that I used to listen to, I don't anymore because it's just too much for me. Just it's also too satanic now. But they had like one song where I think one line was something like, even hell can get comfortable once you've settled in. And that's something that happens to these people in these scenes, is that you're kind of, for whatever reason, maybe it's your brain chemistry, maybe it's the things happening in your life, maybe it's both, you're kind of stuck in this weird form of sadness, melancholy, depression, call it whatever you want. And you're stuck in that for so long that becomes kind of your reality. And so whenever you kind of start moving out, it's just frightening. It's not pleasant. It's actually unpleasant, and it causes you to feel very stressed. And so what these songs can also do is, like, okay, they allow you to express something, but what they do then is that they keep you there, because that's the hell that let's say, something like that. And so the way that we have to consume art in general is then in a responsible manner, let's say, where you have to be aware of what's going on in you, and you have to be aware of what you're doing, and you actually have to face those things, and then you can use those things in a way that can be beneficial to you, and you can avoid being dragged down by it or being held down by it, something like that.
That makes sense.
You see the whole thing is kind of like very Jungian approach to it. Like you have to confront your shadow and then integrate it. It's kind of the whole bit, you know.
I see. So that sort of segues us into drugs and music and whether or not there's a link and what's going on there. And I just want to preface this by saying I listened to Joe Rogan and Peterson talk recently, right? They just did a talk, and Joe Rogan was going off on his usual drugs are good bandwagon, and Peterson did not follow him there, which I thought was good. But I found it fascinating because the example he gave, or one of the examples, was he said, here's Jimi Hendrix. And I was like, that's the example you want to use to support your drug argument? What next? Janis Joplin? Like, I mean, none of these people did well with their drugs. And, his argument was like, well, every time I listen to his music, I'm sort of transported sort of thing. And a lot of people are. Like, Jimi Hendrix is an amazing artist, obviously, right? But it didn't end well for him. And so it's kind of like, is this trade-off worth it? Like, yeah, we have his music because technology and recording and stuff, but like we lost him. And maybe I'd rather have him as a lesser guitarist, but no drugs, but still alive, or alive for longer to do more work or something. I don't know that there's a direct correlation between like he could have done what he did without the awesome drugs, because I don't think that's true at all. But there's clearly a link because you see a lot of drugs in music referred to directly in some cases. But a lot of bands they have drug problems, and Metallica, one of my favorite bands, right? The best album, but probably one of the best albums of any genre, but there's certainly the best heavy metal album of all time, Ride the Lightning. It just stands alone. It's so good. I mean, there's nothing else even remotely like it. The reason why they only did one of those albums that was that good is because they kicked Dave Mustaine out of the band because he was dealing drugs and he was kind of a druggie himself. And they were like, we don't want that around us. And, good on them. They're probably the only heavy metal band back then that had that attitude about it. So there does seem to be a link, whether it's, pure alcoholism or some of the harder drugs, between drugs and music. And so what do you think that is? Like, what's that all about?
Well, I don't know. I think there's probably a bunch of things coming together. So, and I'm pretty certain that a proper psychologist, Jordan, could give you a better answer than I'm gonna know. But I do think that there's a certain link between the personality type that is artsy and that is usually working in some art field, maybe music, maybe painting, but probably mostly music. That's where there's an overlap with that personality type and those things that kind of make you susceptible. Is that a word?
Susceptible?
Yeah, susceptible to drug use. So there's a certain, like, with the image of the artist, we have a certain kind of troubledness associated. Let's say a certain amount of chaos, certain amount of sadness, dysregulated emotions in general. And a state like that, to someone in a state like that, drugs, whatever it is, be it alcohol, be it cocaine, be it whatever, is whatever your problem is. Let's say these kind of substances are obviously attractive because they not only make you not have to deal with it, because you don't have to. They kind of reverse the effects to a degree, and they also kind of make you not. They make you not have to feel the things that you don't want to feel. So that's why people drink. Excessively. That's why they. It's also because it's fun. Obviously, I like my wine as much as the next guy. But there's a they so I think there's a connection there, and that's kind of more boring compared to the other thing that we can talk. I don't actually think that it's boring. I think that's very interesting and worth exploring. But the other thing that's kind of more ethereal, let's say, is that with specifically drugs like dissociatives and psychedelics, there's something happening when people take these kind of drugs, and I've literally no idea what it is. But so some people like to say, you tap into a different realm. Other people would say that you open yourself up to certain forces, be that positive or negative. But you're definitely accessing something. So if we talk about, you mentioned Joe Rogan, so let's talk about DMT for a second, which is like the archetypal DMT experience that people talk about now, and that Terence McKenna talked about so much, is you have the chrysanthemum above you, then you break through it, and then you're in a weird space that's like underground, and you have all these kind of weird, he called them self-dribbling jewel basketballs, the machine elves coming towards you, and showing you weird stuff and all that, and so you're convinced you actually tapped into a different part of reality that you have no access to otherwise. That's how people perceive it, and they perceive it as absolutely real. It doesn't feel like a hallucination or something like that. Or the way that if like on psychedelic mushrooms, for example, you kind of there's a presence there, and to some people it talks. For some people it's more of a non-verbal language, but there is something happening there, and it kind of is related to creativity. And the one way that it's related to creativity is that it's a similar kind of chaos. So creativity has to be chaotic to some degree, because that's its nature. I would say it's linked to the feminine, and the feminine is an archetypal concept, is much more related to it's not related to order. Let's say it like that. The feminine is not related to order, but because people get angry if I say the feminine is connected to chaos. It's not related to order, obviously. Order is a masculine principle, and these kind of drugs, they I think facilitate that. They allow those things to take over, and so if you can access a state like that, then obviously if you're skilled enough, you'll be able to harness that to some degree. And so I think there is a connection like that. Like I've had my fair share of psychedelic experience, let me tell you that. And so I and so I understand where that is coming from. I don't buy into the idea that artists wouldn't have made the art that they or let's say wouldn't have been as good, as great artists as they were, if they hadn't participated in these kind of events, let's call it. I don't think that these things are necessary, but I think that is how they did it. They did access these realms, so they did connect to this part of reality, or whatever you want to call it, you dirty hippie. They did that, and that obviously influenced their art. But then the other thing is that if you listen to so it's like one of the bands that are so highly associated with psychedelics, it's like Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd they weren't an acid band.
Right.
I think some of them for a short period of time smoked a respectable amount of pot. But that also stopped very, very, very soon. And like Waters and Gilmour, I'm not sure. I think they did have an experience with like LSD or something, but they didn't pursue that. The only one who did was Sid. And we all know what happened to him. And
Right.
the great pieces of art that we associate with Pink Floyd nowadays, he wasn't a part of that at all.
Right.
And so it's
Right.
kind of
And they're about him in some case.
yeah, right. If you look at like "Wish You Were Here," for example,
Yeah.
very much so. But so we have this kind of misconception, and I'm not entirely sure where it comes from, but we have this kind of misconception about these great artists, and they're all into like they're tripping every weekend or something like that. No, that's not happening. And the people who do that, their art isn't as great. It's interesting. There's this one tale of Sid. I think it was like the last recording session or something like that they had together. I'm not entirely sure, but maybe you've heard it. Like, Have You Got It Yet? It's such a great story because so Sid comes in, the band is there, and he's like, "Oh, I have this new song I want to show you." And so he shows them the song, and they start playing it. And then they ask, "Did we get it right?" And they said, "No, you have to do it like this." And they keep doing this for a long period of time. And what they eventually realize is that he just keeps changing the song and then asking, "Have you got it yet? Have you got it yet?" And they could never get it because obviously it wasn't the same as he came in with. And so that's a piece of art that I would have loved to see, to be honest. There's no recordings of it, sadly. But so that's kind of the interesting bit of psychedelic art, if it's done really like in the manner that psychedelics would require you to do it, is that it's not capturable in that sense. It's much more like a thing happening. And in that moment, the thing is happening. Let's call it significant, something like that. But
Right.
if you had a song like that, just the song like that, I don't think you'd like it.
Right. It's
Yeah.
ephemeral. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's a one-time sort of
Yes.
relation to your experience. And there's a lot of art like that. There's a ton of songs that I heard once that was really cool. And then I heard again, I was like, this is terrible.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like when
Yeah.
did I like this enough to listen to it again? But most music, as you listen to it once, you're kind of like, maybe, and then you hear it again, and right, you find more and more and more. So there's that aspect. John Vervaeke talks about reciprocal narrowing, right? We get one good song, right, and reciprocal opening, right, or broadening. And I think, yeah, there's those two aspects to music, and because there are these patterns that you're mimicking at some level, and that goes into Gerard. I had a chat about Gerard with Justin, 2 parts actually. We're probably gonna do a third, but like there is this mimicry aspect, right? And I think that the drugs interfere with that in some sense, because from all of the texts that I've read, they all mention the psychedelic sorts of experiences, or the experiences you can get with chemical intervention, or however you want to frame it. And they all say universally throughout all the cultures, throughout all the time periods, that that's close, but it's not better than getting there on your own without the chemicals. So that's weird that every single text says that, right? Unless it's true. And then when you hear some of these artists talk about this, and not all of them, but a lot of them, I listened to Geddy Lee, My Effing Life recently, which is an interesting book. I was listening to an audiobook because I was doing some driving. But he says, like, yeah, we were doing cocaine, and yeah, it was terrible for my voice, and it was bad for our music, and that's not our best album. And I was like, yeah, I mean, and I've heard that a lot of artists say that, right?
Yeah.
And a few of them are, we don't know, right? And I'm sure there's a couple out there going, oh no, without LSD, I couldn't have written that song. But I don't believe any of that.
No.
And I think that the correlation for me is, again, it's a pattern, it's a mimetic pattern, right? You've got this seeking within the realm of chaos for the order that could be brought forth, that aligns with, we'll say, the greater order of the universe, right? So that there's a self-similar fractality to reality, to the universe, and you want to capture some of that, but of course you can't capture it within the pattern, right? Because you're stuck in the pattern, in that mimetic pattern. So you go outside of that to kind of add more to it, enhance it, make it a little bit better, maybe, hopefully, right? And so it's that seeking. Well, you can do that seeking with music, right? Or you can do it with drugs, right? And so the fact that the two sort of seem to correlate or whatever in some rough fashion is no surprise. And some of this is pure we'll say modern legend or modern myth. I don't know if you know about this, but apparently Led Zeppelin, when they got done with the show, they would go and sit in the back room or go back to their hotel rooms and like read. Like that's what they did. So now the urban myth is that they raucous parties after the shows and they trash their hotel rooms. And it turns out that, I think his name is Grant, their manager, used to hire people to trash the hotel rooms and then pay the hotel to fix it up, to create this myth around the band. And I was just like, that is so hysterically funny. And so I think people have that idea from incidents like that. And obviously, there's John Lennon and the Beatles and stuff. But what people don't seem to realize is that there's a break in their music. So there was a time when they were just playing music and being musical, right? And then there's a time, and I think Burn Power of the Anadromous points this out, right? There was a time when their music changed, but that seems to be Bob Dylan's fault, which, I'm not a fan. And then there's a time when it changed again, and that seems to be them getting into drugs. And, we can argue about, the merits of the Beatles music. I was never big on the Beatles, ever, not once. So I'm kind of like, whatever, Beatles, who cares? I'm not as blasé about it as Oasis is. What did they ever do? But I also, I'm not a big Beatles fan. I never was. And a lot of the people I know who are like, the Beatles are the band, right? Like they are the one. For me, the band would be Led Zeppelin for sure, right? That's the band.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But for a lot of people who think like the Beatles are the band, they're all dirty, smelly, hippie drug addicts. Every single one of them. So I don't know. Maybe a small sample, but also, there's something there. But I think the correlation is more about the seeking. Seeking these patterns, seeking these experiences, because music gives you an experience you can't get without the music, in some sense, at least, from my ear. From my subjective interaction with it, you're being there for the Dirt Poor Robins concert at the Symbolic World Summit, for example. Like you can't even reproduce that. Like it's not that I hadn't heard those songs, except for the new ones that they played, right? I hadn't heard the songs, but the context was different, right? The addition of having them there, right, of having met them beforehand, actually in the street randomly before the event, right, and being there, they're in costume, things are happening. It didn't go exactly smoothly. It's at one point, right, a few little problems in the middle of the concert, right, but like that, I can't reproduce that. I don't want to try either, right? I want to say like, oh, that's great. There's the ephemeral version. On the other hand, I can go back again and listen to it, get some of that sort of flavor back, right? Which I actually haven't done. Which reminds me, I should probably do that. But that's a unique experience, and the reason why they do that is they're seeking to give you that flavor from wherever they get it from, right? To our earlier point, who knows where artists get their crazy stuff from? You don't know where you get this stuff from. Sometimes it just comes out of wherever, right? Wherever. It doesn't come out of the material realm, we'll say. It's more ethereal. But because they're seekers, drugs is another way to do that seeking. aside from, your excellent point about, yeah, a lot of these people are just depressed and they need some help. They might be depressed because they can't manifest, we'll say, the beauty that they see in the world, right? Or the potential for the beauty that they see in the world, in the actual world. And you get a lot of sense of that for some of the more melancholic bands that came out of, we'll say, England in the late 80s and early 90s, for example, right? The Depeche Mode crowd and stuff like that. And the Smiths. I was thinking about the Smiths. I guess Morrissey saying some
The
spicy
Cure.
stuff as usual,
Yeah.
right? But you get this sort of melancholy out of there, and like that's important. Like I actually kind of like some of the Smith stuff. How Soon Is Now is a just fantastic song, very deep. But they're seekers, and they're bringing something back with them on their journey. And drugs is very much a seeking journey type thing, I think, as you outlined. So I don't know what you think of that sort of idea.
The way that looking back on my own experiences with it, I don't think we bring anything back. To be honest, I don't think that any of it is connected to the music directly. I mean, there's this kind of chaotic realm that both the creative and the psychedelic share to some degree. That's true. But the reason, so one thing that psychedelics do, dissociatives as well in some way, but psychedelics more, is they massively enhance narrativization of everything that happens. So there's a if it's real or not, that's a different question. But there's a plot that you start to see, let's say, where you didn't see one before, and that gives people a massive amount, like a perceived amount of purpose, because they're like, oh yeah, this thing has to happen. And like if you're watching a movie and you see things fall into place, but like heightened, massively heightened. And I think that just people in general, they like having meaning in their lives.
Yeah.
That's a cool thing. And the more you have of it, it can be overwhelming, obviously, but the more, let's say, important you can also feel, something like that. And I think that as an artist who is connected to these kinds of, drugs, and then also, making art, I think what you want to do is you want to connect those things, because it gives you a justification to keep doing these things. Like I've had a lot of fun. Like I was very good at navigating these chaotic realms that you get into on psychedelic drugs. I was very good at it, and I liked being good at it as well, because that was for me. Like I didn't excel in many places, and that was one place where I could actually excel, and so that gave me a form of competence. Like an experience of competence, and also of like a feeling of being better than other people at something, and that's a pleasant feeling. Obviously, that's why people often do the things that they do, and so you want you want to if you've got a taste of it, you want to maintain that. And so I think that's why artists who are bragging about their drug experiences, like I just did, like continuously on their art journey, I think that's why they put so much emphasis on it. But looking back on all the stuff that I've written while under the influence, or after I came back from a trip, something like that, none of that was connected to the trip. It's always the same kind of thing. It's always the same process, It's always the same feeling, let's say, associated with these kind of things, and there's no overlap between the emotional space where you are in on mushrooms, for example, and the emotional space that you tap into when you write a song. I don't see the connection, and I really tried to, like, before I became Orthodox and all that kind of stuff, I really tried to make it work. Like, I really tried to find out, okay, so how can I bring this place back here? Maybe if I play my guitar like this or whatever. No, it's not happening. And I think that the artists who claim that it's happening, I think they're lying to themselves. I don't think that they're lying to their audience. Knowingly, I think they're lying to themselves.
Yeah, well, yeah, a lot of people don't really realize. People don't tend to lie to other people very often. Those are psychopaths, right, or sociopaths or something. People lie to themselves, and they use you to justify it, right? They use you to, like, oh, see, you believed me, therefore I must be telling the truth to myself, right? That's so. Yeah, I like that. I think that's that matches what I know. I mean, unfortunately, I again, as mentioned, my musical talent is roughly zero. So, and I also don't do any drugs and never have. So, you know,
Good.
like, this is something I really don't know all that much about. I talked to a lot of people who do drugs. I've been the overseer of people on many different drugs, unfortunately, and it's like, I don't know why you guys like doing this stuff, but hey, more power to you.
No,
Well,
less power. It's
yeah.
not a
Well,
good
they have
thing.
less power.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, they all failed. Like, they're all failures, unfortunately, every single one of them, which is too bad. Like, they could have done so much more with their lives, but, you know, look, I mean, if nothing else, you're spending your time, energy, and attention in pure entertainment land that is completely disconnected from everybody else's experience, because that's what you're doing with drugs. Is you're putting yourself entirely in your head. And I'm not a fan of that, because I'm a meditation guy. So, roughly speaking, I'm like, you know, there's some advantages to that. But I'm like, but you have to control it. Like, you can't, you know, you want to be driving the bus, and you want to have help too. You don't want to do it by yourself. Meditate alone. That's no, don't do that. All right. You want to have a lot of help. But these people on drugs, who knows where that's going to take you. And most drugs aren't dose stable. So it's not like, oh, I took 2 last time, I can take 2 this time and get the same effect. Like, no, not even close. It's not even close for most of them. Maybe DMT, maybe psilocybin, but nothing else. Psilocybin's hard to take a clean dose of, because it's a freaking mushrooms. It's like, how much are you actually getting? Nobody knows, right? And that's, you know, that's just some of the problems. But you know, I like what you said, is like, you know, you try to do it, right? Because again, I think there's that artist spirit of going into that chaos, trying to get something out of it to bring back to share with everybody. Because I mean, that's what artists are really bringing things back to share with everybody. Even so, I'm a photographer. That's about the closest I get to art. I almost never show anybody my photography. There's a few exceptions, because I have some outstanding work. But like, I'm not big on, like, you know, sharing it with the world or anything like that, even though I've got a ton of it. But like, for me, the sharing is in the possibility, the potential of, well, I have this, right? And that's actually been really valuable lately, especially with social media. I'm like, oh, I bet I have a picture that matches this, right? I bet I have something already that I own, that I took, right? That's mine, that I can, you know, that I can enhance something with. But you really do it for, not to capture the moment, but to connect the moment with something else. And in my case, it's almost always things in the future. There's very few times when I go, oh, this picture, I know exactly why I want to take it right now, or something. That almost never happens. It happens occasionally, but usually it's like, this is important. I don't know why. It'll be important in the future, right? Maybe. And so I won't take a chance. I'll stop, take the picture now, like, capture the moment, right, and then proceed as if, right. And I think that's super important for art in general, is that you have that connection. But it's really the same as with the drugs. Like, again, you're going into the chaotic place in your mind, roughly speaking, and trying to drag something out. And I think you're right. It generally doesn't work. And the fact that, we'll say, you drop acid and watch the wall, right, which is a musical and a visual experience, um, uh, and find more in it or something, might just be you know, you had a deficit the drugs are helping you overcome some of that deficit, but actually you're missing a bunch of stuff too, which is like when I talk to people about what they got out of the wall, if they've seen it on drugs once, it warps their image of what was on the screen. It warps their image of what's in the lyrics. It really warps the image that I see the artists trying to create in that case. And they don't seem aware of that at all. They just kind of discount me like, oh, well, you didn't see it, well, while dropping acid or on mushrooms or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I didn't, right? And you do get that experience. I went to a Pink Floyd concert once a billion years ago, and they I didn't partake obviously, but they had cookies that were laced with pot, and they saw some stuff in that concert that I didn't see for sure. I was kind of like, oh, I don't know if I wanted to see that. I'm okay that you saw it, but I had a perfectly fine time without it, right? And so the problem with drugs in my mind is you don't really know, because you have zero control almost. You don't really know what it's doing to you. And so the fact that you think it did something positive, while you might be right 1 in 100 times, I don't think it's much more than that. Mostly it's a negative experience, and you've wasted the time, energy, and attention, and it's almost completely out of your control.
Yeah, it did something. That is true. So there is something happening. I don't think that you're seeing more necessarily, let's say. So there's on a technical level, if I understood it correctly, I think I did. The way that LSD, for example, works is that the you have a certain threshold of things that impressions that get into your active consciousness. And what LSD does is that it either lowers the threshold or it amplifies everything, but the effect is the same. And so there necessarily you are consciously experiencing or observing more, in a sense.
Yes.
But the other thing that's happening in psychedelics, as I said before, is also narrativization. So there's a plot being formed. And it's not like you see the plot now. I don't think that's it. I think that it's actually being formed. And people have the tendency to kind of value this plot that they see under the influence of these substances more than the plot that they would see if they weren't on the substance. And so we kind of lose a sense for what we should be focusing on, something like that.
Yes. Well, you lose your ability to focus on other things. So one of the tricks, and this is a well-known trick from my experience, if you have somebody on LSD in particular, because it quote overconnects, whatever, or lowers the threshold, raises the signal, don't know which it is, doesn't really matter, right? The material effect is irrelevant. But if you have somebody on LSD, you can do fun things with them, right, as their handler. So you can take somebody on LSD and say, did you ever think about your tongue? And so what happens is, they're overconnected or overboosted or whatever, but they're focused on their tongue for like the next hour. So it's not like they're experiencing more of the world. They might be experiencing more of their tongue. Okay. And, in theory, that could lead you to a great song about your tongue. But you know what? There aren't any of, that I'm aware of, great songs about your tongue. And I know for a fact, a lot of people have used that trick on musicians, right? A lot of people have used that trick. and it doesn't result in music that's richer about the tongue or anything. And I think that would be possible, by the way. And I might be wrong about that because again, I can't play a tune, so whatever. Um, right? But you don't see that, which is really weird because that is one effect that they have. So while they may give you a greater sense, it may be by dropping your filter, right, which is dangerous because like most of what our brain does is filter out and filter out almost all the information we get, almost all the signal. It's filtered out. So dropping that doesn't necessarily result in something better. It's a very materialistic way of thinking about it. Like, oh, I'm going to overconnect my brain and that's going to make me better at music. It's like, I don't know. The best musicians I know talk about having basically OCD and overfocus problems. They don't talk about having like seeing too much in the world problems. That's kind of the opposite. That's more on the psychopathy range, and probably not any of them, but most of the ones that I hear stories about, they get obsessed with a chord or something, right? And they refine it over time, and then finally it comes out, and the rest of the band gets in on it, that sort of thing. And a lot of it's more flow based from there, but there's usually a base of some sort of obsession with a sound, right, or a sequence, and it's built from there. And drugs aren't good for that. They're very distracting for that, from what I've seen from babysitting people on all kinds of freaking drugs.
Yeah, it's very it's a very exhausting experience. Let's put it like that. There's maybe one more thing about the idea that you have to experience this thing on acid or this thing on mushrooms or whatever. Then is that as we said before, like people tend to overvalue these kind of insights that they have, and they do that in a way that's like, well, usually we're caught up in our own little world, and then you take mushrooms or LSD or whatever, and then you're connected to divine wisdom. That's I think that's the word that they use mostly. And I would like to be. That's something that I thought about a lot in the past year. I would like to point out that that's definitely not what's happening, because and I'm not talking religiously here. So one thing that I cannot recreate the moment for you, so it's not going to have the impact that it at all that it had for me. But a few years back, when I was living in Germany, and I think was maybe not my last time taking mushrooms, but something like that, like close to the end, and I was like 3 hours in. I had half of the, one of the weird, I think that was that one, I'm not entirely sure, but like an experience like where like thousands of perceived personalities were like going through my head, like a filter that you put on like pure consciousness, and I knew some of them, I didn't know. So it was like very weird experiences. And then at some point I would like go downstairs where my kitchen was, and open my fridge, and something happened, like some thought, and I don't know what it was now, but I was very like struck by lightning. And I was like, this is the most personal thing that I've ever experienced. I don't know where it came from. I don't know what caused it. I couldn't tell you now. But the thing that happens with psychedelics, it seems, is that everything that you experience there, everything that you see is still the same way, just heightened, as it is when you're sober, is comprised of what's inside of you. So the entire experience, as divine or whatever eternal it may seem in the moment, it's still you. That that's what it's made of. I'm not sure if that's an understandable statement. So people think that they're like, oh yeah, these angels talk to me, or I talk to God, or anything like that. But in actuality, the thing that's happening is still their own subjective view on reality. It's just chaotic, and it's also heightened and narrativized in a way that makes you unable to see that it's still you to some degree.
Hmm.
And
That's
yeah.
interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. That seems to match with the things I've seen watching people. They seem to think they get these great insights. I have a very good friend of mine who's doing, I don't know what, probably mushrooms and LSD, and he came out with this great mathematical concept. He's an absolutely brilliant person, brilliant beyond the imaginings of mere mortals like ourselves. And he said, I've got this great new mathematical system called the 0 1. And I was like, but you just break math if you do that. Like if you combine 0 into 1 into a single symbol that can be whichever one you want whenever you need it, yes, you would fix math. That's actually technically correct, by the way. And that's actually how quantum computers work to some kind of extent, right? So when the quantum computers came out, he was like, see, I told you. Right. Well, yeah. Right. And of course, it turns out that it's not a useful way to think about the world. But at the time, and for years after, he was always the 0 1, and it became a big joke in the group. We'd always tease him about the 0 1. But I think you're right. I think you get more focused internally and trapped internally, and you have no frame of reference to realize you're trapped internally. And then some part of your id or your ego starts narrativizing, right? And now you're further into yourself, and you feel more connected because you feel more of yourself. But feeling more of yourself is not feeling more connected at all. It's actually the opposite, right? And so it is kind of a trick, kind of a pull the wool over your eyes sort of a thing. And I think you're right. I think that's sort of the danger. And I never really thought of it that way. So I really appreciate this. Look, we've been going for 2 hours. Do you want to keep going, or do you want to wrap things up? Is there something else that we didn't cover?
I don't think there's anything that we didn't cover. So if something comes up, like I'm down to keep talking. But if we're done for now, it's also fine. So I'll leave that up to you.
Why don't we take some time to digest? I did want to point out to everybody, the structure of this talk is not mine. I know I'm sort of conducting this as like an interview with all these questions, that I do have these questions written down. But this is really Two More V's talk. And
it's all my fault.
To discuss these things. Yeah, and he wanted to discuss these. I mean, I wanted to talk to him about literally anything, because he's an absolutely fascinating person. And if you can get to know him better, even just through his music, you absolutely should. But I just want to let everybody know that I did not come into this talk with an agenda. It was more something we had discussed over time, especially since we met at the Symbolic World Summit. And I'm grateful that he wanted to talk to me about these things. So I don't know what that's about, but I'm actually very honored by that. I wanted to let my audience know that. And I think what we need to do is just ruminate on this stuff and sort of think about it, because I think we actually had a good ending on the last question that we wanted to address, which was the potential link between drugs and music. And then maybe, if you're willing to make time and you come up with more stuff, or I come up with more stuff, we can do another talk in the future. How does that sound, Two More V's?
Sounds good.
All right. Well, look, thank you so much. This was super helpful for me. I need to talk to more artists. Maybe I can rope Peugeot in one of these days. Maybe I'll get up the gumption and have a chat with him about icon carving or something, and how that fits into navigating the self-similar fractal pattern of reality or something, which might be right up his alley.
If you don't invite me for that, I'll be very angry.
I will absolutely invite you for that. I think that would be wonderful. Yeah, it'd be good to have a nice four-way conversation, because I think after years of trying, I've gotten Sally Joe to the point where she can actually speak to other people coherently. So that would be wonderful if we could get her in on that. So yeah, look, thanks everybody for watching. Thank you, Two More V's, for taking the time. We'll try to arrange something else in the future. and maybe one or more of us will bug Monsieur Peugeot and see if we can and see if he wants to dive in on this deep topic, because I think it's super important, and it's right up the alley of my channel. So hopefully we'll do it again soon, and we'll see you all there.